So that's an incredible evolution there, and shifting from clinical genetics over into more and more administrative roles, and then looking at systems and supplementing your education so that you could better accomplish what you needed to there. Talk a little bit about your experience in medical school and during your residency.
Wow, I don't know what to say. I mean, medical school is medical school. I went to medical school in Philadelphia. The school I went to is now part of Drexel, University School of Medicine. So it's evolved over the years. Well, medical school is just medical school. You work hard, you study hard.
Well, 2 years of those, the curriculum is evolving, and the model that you and I experienced was sort of a Johns Hopkins model of 2 years of clinical,
and then
preceded by 2 years of basic science, and the undergraduate degree and whatever you majored in. So gradual integration into attending lectures first, doing some labs, and then gradually being exposed more and more to clinical things, mostly in the hospital.
Right,
That's
fair? True. I have a niece who just finished her medical studies at Downstate about a year and a half ago. She's now a resident in OBGYN on Long Island. So she started seeing patients right away, along her 4 years of medical school. So yeah, I think they've mixed up the curriculum a little bit.
They have, and apparently, I think at this time, some of the medical schools are renovating and are eliminating lecture halls. So the notion of working directly with clinical problems and acquiring their knowledge that way seems to be gaining some traction. So the model is evolving.
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing.
You and I experienced a model that was prevalent during the 20th century.
Well, I had a lot of professors talk about their research, and it wasn't very germane to what the topic was. So I actually don't think that that's such a big loss.
Right.
In some cases, not in all cases.
Totally
but
agree.
Certainly in some, yeah.
And your residency, how did that go? How is a residency in clinical genetics?
Well, I actually did a residency in pediatrics and infectious disease first.
Oh, okay.
So I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for a year, where I did pediatrics, and in those days, pediatrics and infectious disease were mingled.
Yeah.
In those days, actually, as a pediatrician, you took care of people in their early to mid-20s. And you did a full rotation on infectious disease with adults. So it's very different from the way it is today.
Yeah.
And then I moved out to California, and I went to the University of Southern California and did 2 more years of residency there. And then I followed that with a 2-year fellowship in clinical genetics and birth defects.
What pulled you from general pediatrics into clinical genetics?
It was the most interesting thing I did. And it had the least things I hated.
Okay.
Seriously.
And
there was a lot of other well, I was going to be a specialist. That was, I mean, it was
your
just
tendency
like,
to
it was
concentrate.
sort of in my head.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why I'm like that, but it was just in my head I was going to be a specialist. So.
Well, in medical school, what drew you into pediatrics?
You know, I'll be basically frank with you. I've told very few people this story. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had actually started medical school. I wanted to be a surgeon. I met some surgeons in surgery. I didn't care for it for many reasons, particularly being a woman. So I was kind of not sure. I knew I was going to do either internal medicine or pediatrics. So I applied to 3 or 4 programs at each, and I just kind of let the match decide. I'm serious about that. I didn't interview anywhere.
Yeah.
I applied to top-notch programs. I didn't know if I'd get any. I actually hoped that I wouldn't match, but I did match. So that just, you know, sometimes you just don't know what door to open. So I just left it up to the fates.
Sure.
I know for someone like me that sounds very odd, because I'm somebody who always has a plan A and a plan B. But at that point in my life, I was only 23 years old when I finished medical school, so I was fairly young. So, and again, I hadn't figured out what my next step would be, because I had made a major decision not to pursue surgery.
But it also sounds to me like just you had a lot of capability there. You could have done a lot of things. It wasn't as though you were repelled by a bunch of specialties. You made a couple of decisions about what you didn't want to do, but by and large, you could drink it all in.
Yeah, I didn't feel that I had any constraints. It was a matter of what would fit with what I wanted to do with my life and what my interests were. I would say that reflecting back on my career now, I had absolutely no interest in administration whatsoever during my training, any of it. In fact, I remember distinctly when I was a fellow looking at the chief of my division in genetics was a woman, and she spent all her time worrying about money and budgets and everything. I said, that's a terrible way to spend your life. So in that sense, I was a very typical physician. I really had very little interest in the business side of medicine, and it's quite ironic that somewhere along the line that changed. I became more interested in policy, and in order to do policy, you have to understand finance and business. So.
Right. Well, I think, you lead to another line of questioning, and that is you trained and then you practiced in a span of time where the role of women in society and in medicine has evolved quite a bit. What was your experience like?
Oh, well, that's a long conversation. Well, when I graduated from medical school, less than 5% of women less than 5% of physicians were women.
Yeah.
So I was working into a largely male-dominated profession. And the same thing happened to me some 12, 15 years later when I went into more of an administrative role, because it was another point at which I was very aware that I was a woman moving into a world which was dominated mostly by men at that time. Most of the administrative jobs, medical directors, chief medical officers, were, and they still are, by the way. I mean, there's probably a lot more women who are in leadership positions now, but it still pales compared to the number of men in leadership positions. I'm at a point where that's not an issue for me. I happen to be the only woman lead in my health plan. I'm the only woman leader. There's 6 people in the executive leadership team. I'm the only one. It's not unusual for me to be the only woman in a boardroom or in a C circle. So sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. So I've kind of traversed that along the way. I would say that it has its challenges, but I think women bring a different point of view, a different approach, perhaps than a typical male view.
How do you relate differently to peers who are male or female?
How do I relate differently? I think it all depends on who they are. I think different men relate to women differently. I mean, I've had both men and women peers who don't relate well to a woman in leadership, and I've had others who are terrific and supportive. So I think it really depends more on the individual than their gender. I think gender plays a role. I mean, we all, if you've read the book Blink, have you? Okay.
No.
So Blink is a book about how we set up our expectations and even some unrecognized prejudices.
Automatic behavior, yeah.
Just immediately. And there's a wonderful story in Blink about, and I think this happened with the BSO in the 50s. They started doing interviews of musicians behind curtains. And then the first time a woman got picked, they said, oh, this can't be right. Because it was all orchestras, symphony orchestras were all male.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, you've navigated the system very successfully.
Yeah, I've had my issues. I mean, it hasn't all been successes. We learn you learn far more from your failures than your successes. You just don't talk about them.
Yeah. Okay. And what did you major in as an undergraduate?
I had a double major of chemistry and biology.
Okay. And your decision to go into medicine, what was behind that?
I knew I was going to be a doctor from a very young age. So that was something that I was probably 13, 14.
And are there other physicians in your family?
I have a sister and brother, and then I have a niece.
Okay.
And I have another niece trying to get into medical school.
In the generation ahead of you, your parents or your
Nope,
grandparents?
I was the first one.
Okay. All right. That's great. Excellent. Now we've covered an awful lot today.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to bring up?
No, I think we've covered a lot.
Okay. Well, this is, I mean, just what a wonderful career. What a fascinating career.
I've been very fortunate.
Yeah. And you know, you were the right person at the right place for the
I don't
medical
know about
society.
that. I think,
Yeah, well, you were.
you know, the medical society is great in that you have a leadership team and you learn from each other.
Yeah.
It's very much a mentorship program. So I learned a lot from when I was vice president and president-elect. I wouldn't have been as effective if I didn't have great leaders ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I hope I influenced the people behind me.
You certainly did. Certainly influenced me. So I thank you for this interview
Good,
today.
thank you.
It was great talking to you.
Good. Likewise. Thank you.